Greetings and a warm welcome from me, astrologer Patrick Arundell. Today, in the latest of my deep dive videos, I'm going to explore the journey of the fleet-footed winged messenger Mercury through the intense, deep and passionate sign of Scorpio, which begins on October the 22nd at 6:49 a.m. and goes on for 20 days through to the 10th of November. But what makes this event so powerful this time round is that from the 26th of October through to the 1st of November, Mercury is going to align with Mars, the traditional ruler of the sign of Scorpio, and this becomes exact on the 29th. Also, the first 10 degrees of the sign of Scorpio, the decan, is also ruled by Mars. So with the events in the world at the present time and the urgency that the combination of Mercury and Mars can create, this is something I really want to explore. If you're new to my channel, it's lovely to have you with us. This is very much a community. If you have any thoughts, please do share them. I do try to interact with each comment. If you're a returning visitor, it's great to have your company once more. Your likes, shares or comments and subscriptions are really, truly appreciated. Now, I'd just like to tell you about a very exciting and unique opportunity to understand what the planetary transits of year 2024 will mean for you personally. If you give me your personal birth data, I'll produce for you your transits report, which is where the planets in the sky are interacting with your natal birth chart. But I will provide for you the rest of this year free. But also in my special package of 30% off, you can get your life roadmap, your character analysis report. This gives you searing insights into the patterns that have played out in your life so far and helps you to gain a much more intimate understanding of how to work with them going future forwards. Please see beneath this link for more. So Mercury in Scorpio is quite the combination, but let's just have a little exploration of the themes of Mercury. Mercury is the divine communicator, and it governs two zodiac signs. Firstly, Gemini, which of course is an air sign, and secondly, Virgo, which is an earth sign. But the critical thing is they're both mutable in terms of their quality, therefore very flexing, and this means that the energy of Mercury is indeed something that pivots around, and that inherent flexibility is really interesting as it moves into a sign that's fixed, which is what Scorpio is. Now, Mercury rules our mind, our thoughts and our communicational style, but at times it can be very playful, particularly in its rulership of Gemini. But it can have a little bit of a magician's vibe, a bit tricksterish, and it can also see us connecting to technology, travel and contracts. Now, through its specific rulership of the sign of Gemini, it's very much to do with our daily communication and connection. So with our neighbours, with siblings, and of course in this day and time, emails, text messages, and that sense of mischief that Mercury has in Gemini can also see it be very dexterous and pivot on a sixpence, but be a little bit flirtatious and then almost enjoy being somewhat provocative. Now, through the sign of Virgo, its earth element wants to see us shape things in a practical way and where we can see some tangible outcomes. So it's perfect for grappling with the details and being very precise and analytical. But at times, Mercury in Virgo can see us hone in on the details to such an extent we find it much more difficult to see the big picture, and that can create some intolerance and a tendency to be a little bit irritable. Now, one of the interesting things about Mercury, particularly in the days that we live in, is that it is an androgynous influence, so it's neither male nor female. So it perfectly fits in to the shifting modes of identity that seem to prevail these days. Now, in mythology, Mercury, obviously the winged messenger, was also an influence that could pass down insights and information from the heavens. And it was said, therefore, to connect the mortal and immortal worlds. And this is going to be intensified through the mystical transition through the complex energies of Scorpio. Now, of course, Mercury in Scorpio brings a different dimension to bear because this is a water sign, but it's also fixed. So whereas Gemini and Virgo can flex, here Mercury is more boxed into a particular approach. So although the sign of Scorpio brings an element of mystery, what we find with Mercury is that it dons its detective's mask. So it's really direct, which obviously Scorpios can be, very probing, searching for the answers that may not be immediately obvious. Now, one of the things about Mercury moving through Libra is that it's very much about the conversation. And it can be very good at listening and sharing information. But perhaps what we should think about in terms of the Scorpio influence, Scorpio is not really interested so much about the responses. It's interested much more about what the true meaning or feeling is. So in other words, the subtext. So it's cutting through the potentially more superficial exchanges of the sign of Libra. It wants to really penetrate, and it can be very stubborn on its mission to wheedle out what is really the reality. Now, on the screen now, I'm sharing with you the solar event chart, so we can all relate collectively to what this event means. And you can see that Mercury there in house 8, as it would be, is in a perfect alignment with Saturn. So that's pretty good, because Saturn in Pisces, obviously another water sign, so that's anchoring that analysis that Mercury can bring. But there is a bit of a problem here, because Mercury actually squares up to the position of the moon, and that is also in a fixed sign in the sign of Aquarius. So I feel integrating our emotions will prove more challenging over the next 2 weeks. So you can see that Mars is just parked up there, just under 7 degrees away from Mercury, but Mercury darts forwards quickly, and as I mentioned, by the 29th it is going to be in an exact conjunction, but from the 26th they're getting closer and closer. They're within 3 degrees, and the issue here is that Mercury and Mars together can be very impulsive, and because the sign of Scorpio can really hit home quickly, it can be very decisive but very defensive. We need to make sure that we're not jumping to conclusions when people tell us things, information, the conversation, that we're not reacting. And obviously the world at the moment is in a very fragile position in terms of those global politics. And we should also notice that Mercury does retain its square to the modern ruler of Scorpio, of Pluto. So although it's moved, it's still within a 4-degree orb, and the Sun is still in an outright square with Pluto. So even though we were having those conversations with Mercury, and on the face of it they can seem to be quite constructive, there's still other planetary energy around this event which is quite unstable. Therefore, in our own personal situations, it's absolutely vital that we don't rush to judgment. We can be determined to get to the root of situations, and it is also true that from Saturday the 1st Mercury will move into the second decan of the sign of Scorpio, which is sub-ruled by the much more expansive energies of Jupiter. So that means that we could have a little bit of an antidote to the intensity that is going to build up as we go towards that lunar eclipse in the sign of Taurus, and that will see Mercury and Mars in that conjunction. So that brings a very important dimension to that event, which I will share with you in due course. Now, What I want to do is go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can expect in your situation in terms of your sun or your ascendant over the next 20 days. So Aries for you, as Mercury moves through the sign of Scorpio, in a very practical way, it could see you thinking about things like investments, savings, pensions, property matters. If you're a business person, grappling with trying to bring in new streams of revenue, or perhaps trying to raise some funding. But the sign of Scorpio for you, in a way, because it's also ruled like Mars for you, is an opportunity to try to decode some mysteries in your situation, perhaps in terms of relationships. So if you've been having a lot of discussions recently, and there is someone that perhaps interests you, you're really going to be much more determined now to try to push and provoke even. You may even find yourself provoking to the point of causing a quarrel because you want to gauge just how committed that other person could be to you, which is an interesting thing. You know, we live in a world where obviously we're always said or encouraged to try to find accord, to reach compromises. But sometimes we do have to stand up for what we really believe in. So if you feel that someone's not being outright upfront with you, what the energy of Scorpio will do is give you the utmost determination, particularly in its relationship with your ruler Mars, not to be fobbed off. So, for example, if you're making or want to make a claim on an insurance policy, for example, and you're told that you don't meet the criteria, this transition is going to see you furious, and you're really going to be reading the small print and consulting some online support channels to try to find out whether that is a fair response or not. So you're not going to easily be knocked off whatever it is you want to achieve. So whether you're wanting to get absolute clarity and intimacy in a close emotional or sexual relationship, or you're trying to do things of a more tangible and practical nature around money, this is a time when you simply won't take no until you get the clarity that you need. But that could lead to some kind of transformation. It may not be the transformation you necessarily want, but it may be that you will need to accept that something isn't going to be as you want it to be. And because the sign of Scorpio can be about ends and beginnings, that could see you in a very determined way wanting to break free, to renew the cycle of discovery. So you could bring in a situation or a person who will meet your expectations. Now, Taurus, for you, Mercury moves into the 7th house, which is an interesting paradox. It's just been in the sign of the 7th house, Libra, but for you, Mercury there may have been a bit brittle. You may have found yourself feeling a bit tense, irritable at times. Moving into the 7th house, it's definitely asking you to have the dialogue. But that doesn't mean to say it's all about just having the words, because with Mars in the mix, I think you're going to make it clear to the other party that what you mean is what you say. So a very passionate side of your nature is going to manifest itself, certainly in the first week of this transition. And it could be that the combination of Mercury and Mars is going to give you a little bit more wherewithal in terms of trying to connect to someone. So if you are single but you would like to get to know someone and there is someone you're interested in, this can give you a bit more push to find the inner motivation and desire to really go for what you rightly deserve. So even if you're someone who does find it, you know, understandably a little bit of a tender process to explore, to step out from your comfort zone and perhaps take the first move, for example, you may find yourself really galvanized, particularly over the next week when it comes to your interactions with others. But equally, that could be just ringing up somebody about a job that is of interest to you, or if you work for yourself, promoting yourself in a much more proactive way. Remember, the 7th house isn't just about about relationships. It can also be where we need to deal with people we don't like. It's the sector of open enemies in traditional astrology. So having Mars there could make you a bit blunter and a bit more robust than you have been more recently. But if you're conveying something that you really feel is right, you can do so with conviction, and that makes you authentic, and that's a really good place to be. So Gemini, for you, Mercury is your ruler, of course, so moving into the sign of Scorpio is very redolent of the energies of Virgo. The 6th house position, very much about making sure that everything in our worlds are running well organized and structured, and we're extracting the greatest amount of practical value. So very 6th house energy. But having Mars there could give you an impulse to think very carefully about how much exercise you're doing. Mars in the 6th house is really good for giving us extra stamina. So with Mercury there as well, if there are some tasks at home that you've been putting off, for example, or you feel that maybe you could step up your exercise routine, but you haven't quite found the motivation to go to the gym, go to the pool, or really set a routine up that sees you applying yourself, I think you're going to find yourself much more motivated to do so over the next week in particular. Now that combination with Mars could also see you bitingly pointed in some of your observations. Now that could be a good thing in some ways. You know, if for example you work in a situation where people maybe seek out your help and support quite a bit, but you feel that they're not quite taking enough responsibility for themselves, then I think you're just going to be much more blunt in articulating your viewpoint. So Cancer, for you, Mercury moving into the 5th house is lovely, because the 5th house is very much about demonstrating our affection, but also our creativity, our flair, our talent. Having Mars laying it in wait, ready to greet Mercury, and the sign of Scorpio being very passionate means that, you know, this is giving you a lot of motivation to showcase the best side of yourself, your talents, your warmth, and even your sociability. So Mercury moving through Libra for you could have seen you at times being a bit more inward. Certainly the focus, particularly on the solar eclipse, has been very much about where you live, how you live there, and who with. Now you want to engage, and Mars gives you a lot of thrust. The thing with Mars, it brings a much less fearful dimension to bear. So, you know, through its rulership of Aries, it doesn't think about things so much, it listens to instincts, which I think you could really respect. Through its rulership of Scorpio, it's much more to do with desire and instant gratification. The 5th house is also the sector of chance. So whether it is around your social or romantic situation, or your talents, or just wanting to step up your connection to others, I think Mars gives you a lot more encouragement just to go for it, not analyze things too much. And because you are someone who can be very guarded in your approach, very protective, I think this just encourages you to step out of that a little bit and be a little bit more buccaneering in your approach. So Leo, for you, Mercury moves into the 4th house. There's been a lot of chit chat recently. Some of it may have been with siblings or people in your everyday world, but Mercury moving into the 4th house is quite complex, and of course the host is indeed very complex, the sign of Scorpio. So if there's something in your emotional situation you're not quite sure about, you may find yourself being in the need for some personal space. Now that could be, you can sit in the bath at night, light a candle, put the Epsom salts in, have a glass of wine, and just lock out the world for an hour. That's a great way to have that thinking time. If you're someone who has more available time, you may want to get out into the countryside or near to water. The 4th house, very much in keeping with the need to just let our feelings flow. But essentially, having Mars in the 4th house can be quite defensive. So if there is something that's out of kilter around your home or emotional life, I think this is a big week, not just with this event, but also with the partial lunar eclipse, because your emotions are going to be very close to the surface with that, but it is really going to be around your sense of comfort and security that you feel right at the root of your existence. So even if you're very, very successful professionally, and things are going pretty well in terms of finances, it's amazing we can have those successes, but we can still feel very disconnected and really lacking in some of the enrichment that's so important in life. So Mercury in the fourth house can be rather inward. It can see us circulating ideas around our minds. It's not necessarily so chatty, but when you do speak, it could be in a more reactive way. So just be aware that over the next week in particular, if somebody does needle you a little bit, you may find that your temper could be a little bit closer to the surface, but more in a reactive way. You're not necessarily going to be going around looking for conflict. It's more that if someone doesn't understand the mood that you're in, which could be quieter, more sensitive, that's when you could be triggered more easily. So Virgo, for you, of course, Mercury is your ruler. So moving into Scorpio, ironically, triggers the Gemini virtues of this particular planet. So things are going to speed up for you. And certainly once the Sun moves into Scorpio the following day for Mercury, you're going to get that sense even more. Things are going quicker. And that all builds up to the partial lunar eclipse, when there could be a lot of different strands of energy and information whizzing around. But one of the things you're likely to find very difficult to do over the next week in particular is to sit still. So you could find yourself quite active and quite needing of lots of mental stimulation. So your boredom threshold is going to be much lower. Now recently Mercury has been asking you to focus a lot on everyday resources, the foundations in your world, which is all good stuff and very important. Now it wants you to be stimulated. So whether it's exploring new interests, buying some new technology that you've yearned for a while, you're definitely in the need to be switched on. But you could find yourself very impatient with Mercury in a conjunction to Mars. So if you're traveling anywhere, even if it's on your bike or you're running or walking somewhere, be aware of a sense of impatience, because that could make you a little hasty and not quite as aware of your immediate environment. But there is a sense of excitement and enthusiasm. If you've got ideas you want to share, this is a great time because you can be very persuasive for sure. So Libra, for you, Mercury moves out of your sign. It's going to be joined by the Sun switching into Scorpio on Monday the 23rd of October. So a big shift is in the works. But that shift is very much to do with taking the ideas that you've been generating recently and actually binding them into something that's more tangible. The second house is about foundations, but it's also about our self-worth. It can be to do with our personal values, but also our approach to everyday money. And that's going to come sharply into focus because of the partial lunar eclipse occurs in the part of your situation later on this following week that's very much to do with your longer term resources. Now a full moon can push things into the open. It could push out some successes. If you've really been beavering away, particularly since May time, you could get the rewards in the next week. But certainly if you feel that people are deflecting from you and not really appreciating some of your ideas, talents, or the strands that you've been working really hard at, that could create a sense of irritation. And with Mercury combining with Mars, you're going to be much more robust. You have a reputation of being the diplomat, but when you're stirred, you can be very feisty. So that part of your nature, if you feel that someone's maybe not being straightforward or fair on a financial matter, you're going to give them quite a strident response. Now, of course, the second house can be very sensual because of its overall rulership that comes from the sign of Taurus. So here we're wanting to enjoy the good things in life. But Mercury is a quick energy and Mars can be a much more impatient one. It's about instant gratification. So again, whether it's through your love life, your love of the good things in life, or just wanting to improve your financial lot, there's a sense, there's a hunger there for some kind of transformation that gives you some kind of tangible benefit. So Scorpio, Mercury moving into your sign is great news because it brings you into the moment for sure. I know it squares the moon, which is not great, but the sun arrives in your sign on the 23rd as well. So they're still in conjunction, obviously not exactly like they were last week in the GEMINI, but we've still got your higher octave ruler Pluto causing some mischief, to be honest. So when it comes to the movement of Mercury into your sign, if you have felt a bit cut off from others, or it has felt that some of your anxieties and concerns have felt very prevalent of late, perhaps you've not felt quite as bubbly and sociable as you would like, you're moving into a period when you can start to instigate new beginnings in your situation, or you can inject ongoing strands with much greater dynamism. Now, having your ruler Mars in your sign is certainly going to supercharge the energies of Mercury. The first house is very much about our identity. So if you feel that you've been living your life a little bit too much to please others, or others haven't been appreciating enough what you've been trying to do, your desire and determination to really stick in a very, very powerful way to the plan that you've been preparing and wanting to activate, that determination to stick with that plan is going to be very, very strong this week. And someone could see you as being too single-minded, too focused on what you want, and not enough focused on what they feel or their viewpoint of your situation. So a little bit of delicacy and diplomacy will definitely help, but this is a unique time when you're really going to want to manifest what you feel very, very passionate about. So whether it's a sporting interest, whether it's a hobby, whether it is your work situation at the moment, or someone you're drawn to romantically, you're really going to want to focus on that in quite a narrow way. So you're going to be single-minded and you're going to be very much in the moment. But after the recent weeks of feeling a little bit cut off, anxious or uncertain, it's going to be very good to feel back in the here and now, in the present, and your physical vitality is going to soar too. So Sagittarius, Mercury moving into the sign of Scorpio is house 12. This is double complex. The sign of Scorpio, where Mars is, has already been raking up some very, very powerful and at times polarizing energies. At moments you may have felt very, very angry about things relating to your past, and at others very emotional. Mercury moving here could mean that after the social dimension of recent times, you do actually want some time for yourself. The 12th house is essentially the point of culmination of the whole zodiac. So it can be a very reflective area, but it's also very much to do with the subconscious, the things we don't necessarily want to look at or even admit about ourselves, such as our vulnerabilities, our weaknesses, maybe the things that we don't feel entirely happy with. Some guilt could be floating around as well. But the 12th house can also be where we become much more aware of issues of trust. And unfortunately, over this next week, there may be somebody that really demonstrates in quite a powerful way by their observations upon you, which you're just not expecting, which may come out of the ether, but they could be quite ruthless in pinpointing something that you are feeling quite tender and uncertain about. So if there is a vulnerability that you're feeling, unfortunately somebody could seize upon that. But the other way of looking at the 12th house energy is that it gives us a chance to get in touch with parts of our being that we ourselves have not quite owned. Sometimes because, the need to superficially always manifest this sort of perfect image, the Facebook world of the idyllic lifestyle with all the magical holiday photographs. And of course life just isn't constantly like that. It is gritty. Sometimes it isn't easy. Sometimes we're thinking about loss. If there is somebody important that has passed away in your situation, you may find yourself really feeling very, very mournful about that this week. And that in turn can make you feel very sensitive. And with Mercury and Mars combining, if someone does wander into your situation without a good awareness of some of your sensitivities, it could see you really, really finding it difficult to keep your cool. But the opportunity is to work with the energy that Mercury initially, then the Sun from the 23rd, and Mars are giving you to embrace that tender side. Take it into yourself, own it. Don't feel bad. We all have our vulnerabilities. Now, Capricorn, for you, Mercury moving into the 11th house is brilliant. There's been such a lot of influence in your situation of late in terms of big worldly responsibilities, your connections to your immediate community, you know, whether it is through a voluntary role, looking after grandkids, or you're more focused on your attainment of goals and ambitions in the physical world. The movements of Mercury, followed by the Sun on the 23rd, joining up with Mars in the 11th house, is really cheery, because it's very much about the collective, it's about sociability, the network, it's about your team. And having a team is something that we can all relate to, whether it's the sports team that we support, the principles that we attain to in terms of our values, or it could just be that sense of belonging to a particular community or coming from an area. How we identify with others around us is very much part of the 11th house vibe. But in a more practical sense, the 11th house can also be about what we want from our future. And one of the interesting things about 10th house energy, and you have a greater appreciation of that than any other sign, is sometimes when we get to a big goal and ambition, we realise as we're approaching the summit that actually it's good and we're pleased about it, but we've changed. And we're actually now working towards some other, perhaps more spiritual, divulged version of that previous goal or ambition. So you could find yourself thinking a lot about what you want from your future plans and having a lot of conversations about it. But if you are someone who likes to cooperate and collaborate, do things to do with charity, fundraising, sports clubs, whatever, you're in for a busy and potentially very enjoyable time over this transition. So Aquarius, Mercury moving to the top of your horoscope, the 10th house, can trigger a need to reskill. So if your professional situation isn't giving you the fulfillment that you would really like, or just because of the fast changing pace of the environment we're all existing in means that what you used to do has adapted, changed, or is no longer what you want to do, Mercury moving into the 10th house is a great opportunity to connect with some kind of professional training or re-skilling. But also it can be a time when you're going to become much more fired up to raise your profile and achieve acclaim. Because the Sun's moving on the 23rd, so the gathering of all the positions of Mercury, the Sun and Mars in your 10th house, Mars has already been giving you an added authority and ability to really articulate yourself with a bit more aplomb. This connection of all these influences is really going to make you very dynamic. The 10th house can be about sheer outright goals and success, something that Aquarius people don't necessarily have a reputation for focusing upon. But every single person in the world has a different life force. And you can't just say because of a zodiac sign that you won't be ambitious. So whatever your ambitions are, it could be around a hobby, a sports team, it could be your passion to help person-kind, or it could be outright promotion, extra status and money professionally. You're entitled to that, Aquarius, without feeling guilty. This can be a time when you're very, very motivated, and perhaps also because of the Scorpionic energies, perhaps you're going to manifest some desires that maybe you don't always openly let on about. So maybe there's parts of your nature that you can now share and just go for it. Just demonstrate just how formidably knowledgeable, skilled and astute you are, because people can become much more conscious of your qualities and your talent. Now let me tell you, I'm not a doctor, but they tell me it's hydroxychloroquine. You're going to take this, everything's going to be fine, everything by the Easter is going to be phenomenal, it's all going to be absolutely fantastic. I hope that wasn't too bad. So Pisces, the combination of Mercury moving into the sign of Scorpio, your sister water sign, and of course the link with Saturn, very anchoring in a positive way, joining up with Mars, the sun moving on Monday, the 9th house. If you've yet to have that big vacation this year, you're going to be determined to set it up now. If you can't actually break out of your situation, remember the 9th house is not just about physical travel. We can travel from the comfort of our homes through our minds. And our minds are something that can be stimulated like never before, really, with the internet in its very most positive form. So you're going to feel more adventurous, you're going to feel more outgoing. If you have felt rather trapped in some very deep stuff recently, now your desires to break things up, be more spontaneous, do things off the cuff, bring some variety to bear. It doesn't even matter if it's a change of the type of programs you watch on the TV, a change to your daily routines. Some kind of change. Change is as good as a rest. But also, the 9th house can be about freedom. Have you been ensnared by some kind of pattern in your life? Mercury asks you to think about that. Mars gives you the passion to change it. With the sun coming too, there's lots of opportunities to bring extra thrust, dynamism and excitement to your situation over the next 20 days. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Please take care and goodbye for now.